Next, on the 110th edition of the Capitol Cable, after impeachment, after removal from office, the South Korean presidential election and all of its implications. With us, all-star panel, Jean Mackenzie, BBC, Christian Davies, FT, Martin Fackler, New York Times, and of course, the irrepressible Dr. Cha. That and next, 110th edition, coming your way. All right, good morning to those of you in Washington, D.C. Good evening to those of you in Korea or Japan, as the case may be. Good day to those of you around the world. Welcome to the 110th installment of the CSIS Capitol Cable. I'm Mark Lippert, your host and moderator. This week on the Capitol Cable, elections, impeachment, constitutional court, all of that and much, much more, unpacking the implications for the domestic scene, for the region, for the alliance. An all-star panel. No, we are not at the KBO all-star break yet, but we do have an all-star panel here today. Jean Mackenzie, BBC, Christian Davies, FT, Martin Fackler, New York Times, and of course, Dr. Victor Cha, our regular, joining us as well. Let me introduce them formally and bring them in one by one. First, the great Jean Mackenzie, BBC, foreign correspondent, documentary filmmaker for, of course, the British Broadcasting Company, based currently in Seoul. She's extensive career covering Asia, Middle East, Europe, Baltics, Balkans, and interestingly enough, covered the Belarusian political uprising in 2000. She is part Scottish, part Londoner, born in Scandinavia, grew up in the UK, and of course is the BBC's representative in Seoul. Jean, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Mark. Great to be here.
All right, thanks so much. Really appreciate it. And up next, equally as grumpy because it's been a long week, Christian Davies, and they are staying up late with us. Kidding, of course. They're unbelievably in a great mood, both of our friends from Seoul, even though it's been a long week and it's late there. Christian Davies, FT Bureau Chief, also worked London, Warsaw, a whole host of beats for the FT, and of course I went to school at LSE and the Open University, I believe, in London as well. Christian, welcome back to the show.
Thank you. I did not go to the Open University, but thank you.
Where did you go? I have it wrong. Correct the record, please.
University College London and London School of Economics.
There you go. Okay, I got LSE right, but you know, it's early. I'm good for about 10 mistakes before 11 o'clock, and I'm already on 8. So there you go. But welcome to the show, and thanks for you have been a long sought after guest, and thank you for making it on the show. We really appreciate you being here today.
Thank you.
All right, excellent. Last but not least of our special guests here, Martin Fackler. Martin Fackler, of course, long and distinguished career with a host of different media outlets, AP in Shanghai and Beijing, Wall Street Journal in Tokyo, New York Times. He's been Tokyo Bureau Chief twice, assistant editor for Asia, whole host of distinguished reporting accolades coming out of those positions. Of course, he's also dabbled in the research scholar field as well, working for the University of California, Berkeley, University of Tokyo, Harvard, did a little investing on the side. Maybe you can get some tips here on the markets, both in Asia as well. And of course, a proud graduate of Dartmouth College. Martin, welcome to the show. And did I make any mistakes on your bio?
Mark, it's a real pleasure to be here. No, you got them all. And I was going to say, for stock tips, apparently the place to go is Trump's truth feed. That seems to be the place to get your best tips these days.
Excellent. All right. Outstanding. And of course, I think we have Victor on with us. He was joining momentarily, but everybody knows Victor.
I'm here.
All right. Excellent. Victor, good to see you. Bright-eyed as always. You look great. We've got your bio, of course. You run the geopolitical program at CSIS. You are the Vice Dean Emeritus at Georgetown University, where you're also a tenured professor. Defense Policy Board under Biden, NSC under Bush, and of course, a long-suffering New York Giants football fan. Welcome back to the show, Victor Cha.
Thanks, Mark, and thanks to our guests for joining us today.
Yeah, really, just one more to double tap on that. It's late there. We really appreciate folks staying up with us. A lot of interest in hearing from our special guests, from our viewers. So let's get right into it. I'm going to come to Jean Mackenzie first. Jean, just broad strokes, please. Can you catch us up on what has happened in the last week or so, right? We've got a constitutional court ruling. We've got presidential election machinations. We are off to the races in South Korea. Jean, again, the floor is yours and welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Mark. Yeah, I mean, what a week we've had, right? Last Friday, an enormously tense day in South Korea, as we knew we were going to get the verdict from the Constitutional Court of Yoon's impeachment case. Oh my gosh, it felt like we've been waiting for this verdict for so long. I think everybody in South Korea felt like they had been waiting for it for so long. So, I mean, just to give you a picture here, so you had people camping out overnight outside the Constitutional Court. They were those who were anti-Yoon, those who wanted him impeached. Outside his residence, we had pro-Yoon supporters. And then the day itself, so the Constitutional Court met, they went to deliver their verdict. People around the country watched really in silence on these big screens. You almost could hear a pin drop, right? Everybody was listening to every word. And it was the way in which the court delivered the verdict that was so interesting, because they went with their reasoning and deliberation first before actually presenting that unanimous result where they upheld Yoon's impeachment. But it became clear as Chief Justice Moon was delivering the verdict, the way that it was going, it became more and more obvious, because what the court essentially did was they dismantled one by one the arguments that Mr. Yoon and his legal team had made throughout this trial. So they totally dismissed the claim by Yoon that he had declared martial law in order to send a warning to the public about the opposition party, that he hadn't meant to fully implement this, and that he had sent troops to the parliament that night as a measure to protect people. They first of all found that he had broken the constitution in the most serious way, because he hadn't had the grounds to declare martial law, that his issues with the opposition party and the way the government was functioning before he brought this in did just not constitute this national emergency that he had claimed. But they also found that he had broken the constitution in so many different ways, by sending the troops to the parliament to not allow them to vote down this martial law order, by sending troops to the National Election Commission, that he'd also broken the law on procedural grounds by not having a sufficient enough cabinet meeting. And so really the way in which they delivered this verdict unanimously, but so equivocally and so clearly spelling out just how gravely Yoon had violated this constitution, I think left people really in no doubt. They made sure that there was absolutely no room for misinterpretation. So what we had been expecting last Friday was really the possibility of violence. We'd seen Yoon supporters out on the street for months. They have been growing more and more agitated as we waited for this result. And really, it felt like there was a possibility that we might see things turn violent. Certainly the police and the authorities here were prepared for this. But actually, once that verdict was delivered in such an unequivocal way, people almost accepted it. And they very quickly, on both sides, packed up and went home. And we didn't see the sort of violence that we were expecting. And so from there, quite quickly, actually, over the course of this week, Korea has been able to look forward and to move forward. I mean, so what it meant was that instantly Yoon was removed from office. And that this presidential election race was triggered. So we now have 60 days, or we had 60 days from last Friday, for South Korea to hold a presidential election. And that really is what has been at the forefront for the past week. Mr. Yoon, it seemed, accepted the ruling of the Constitutional Court. There were questions ahead of time whether he would, because he has decided to fight this, so kind of, wholeheartedly. But he did seem to accept it. He hasn't actually addressed the Constitutional Court ruling. He hasn't apologized, but we had him today move out of his presidential residence, leave for the very last time. So kind of the acceptance there. And so, really Korea now is in election mode, and that's where we're at.
Oh, outstanding. And so what are we looking at for the next week, 2 weeks plus? I mean, we are looking at full-fledged campaigning. We seem to have a candidate emerging from the Minjudong, the left of center party. What's happening with the rest of the field, or just give us a little color there, and then I'm going to go to Christian.
Yeah, so we have the leader of the opposition party, Lee Jae-myung. He came out yesterday, in no surprise to anyone, and declared that he would be running for president. Of course, he is the front runner for the Democratic Party, but the PPP, the Conservative Party, they will have to go through a much more rigorous primary process that will take the next few weeks. I think both parties are hoping to have their sort of preferred candidate in place, I think by mid-May. So we're seeing kind of various contenders from the PPP come out. So you have, for example, Yoon's former Labour minister, you have the mayor of Daegu, you have people who well-known names like Oh Se-hoon, the mayor of Seoul, Han Dong-hoon, who was leading the PPP before the martial law crisis. But what you're seeing within the PPP are these two factions, right? You have the faction that sided with Yoon over martial law, and then you have the anti-Yoon faction. And so the big question is, yes, Lee Jae-myung is the front runner for the Democratic Party, but it's early days, right? And we don't have a PPP candidate yet. So the question is, are the PPP going to be able to unite around one candidate? And particularly, are they going to be able to unite around a moderate candidate that can win those moderate votes? And that's what I think would make this an interesting race.
All right, outstanding. Jean, tour de force to start us off out of the gates. Christian, over to you. Really same question, broad strokes. Your thoughts on the last week plus, number one, and number two, what is unfolding and likely to unfold in the weeks ahead?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think it's important to understand or to appreciate some of the context of all this, that this whole episode was not just unconstitutional, it was also completely pointless. This whole few months has been a total waste of time, of everybody's time. It's derailed the country from dealing with a series of really important pre-existing crises that the country had. There was already a political crisis going on, not to the extent that justified the martial law declaration, but we also have a slow-burning economic crisis and a slow-burning security crisis facing South Korea. And on top of that, a demographic crisis and a social crisis, which has been building over a number of years. So we've had an episode which has compromised national security, which has damaged the economy, which has obviously means that former President Yoon will go down in ignominy. And it's done great damage to South Korea's reputation as well. All as a result of actions taken with no rational justification or basis whatsoever. So there's a sense of futility, there's a sense of frustration and pointlessness that we're even talking about this, because Korea already had problems that were not being dealt with actually by successive governments. So it is frustrating for anyone who has this country's best interest at heart that we're having to wrestle with all these issues on top of the problems that the country already has. Anyway, so we are where we are now. We talked about some of the PPP candidates, the conservative candidates. Part of the question now is, will Yoon try to re-emerge as a player in Korean politics from the sidelines? He cannot stand again, even if he had not been removed from office, he would not have been able to stand again because of the one-term limit. But the question is whether he's going to rile his supporters and whether he's going to try and really have an influence on the outcome of the selection of the candidate for his party. And one of the reasons why this is very complicated is, of course, he's still facing criminal proceedings for his actions on the martial law day. So it's not clear whether he will try and mobilize public opinion behind him or whether he actually decides that this could be counterproductive for him. He's shown some signs of not quite walking away from politics entirely, or from street politics at least, where he has been quite active in his absence from office. The other main issue is that none of these PPP candidates at the moment, at least as far as the polling is concerned, seem to be at all able to mount a viable challenge to Lee Jae-myung, the left-wing opposition candidate. And so there is talk, there is reports, there's rumors that the acting president, who's this Yoon appointee, Han Duck-soo, who anyone who's worked in Korean policy for some time will know, he's the acting president at the moment. He doesn't have a direct democratic mandate of his own, but whether elements within his party will try to get him to stand to mount a challenge to Lee Jae-myung, that we don't know where that whether things will go in that direction, but that's also an interesting thing to look out for over the coming weeks.
All right, outstanding. And some point to his, let's put it this way, machinations around the judicial nominations as a sign that he has turned the corner from being a long-time technocratic figure in Korea to a political figure, right? Or at least maybe reading the tea leaves a bit there. So interesting point there. Maybe if I could ask you one other question on, you do work for the FT, you mentioned the economy, very interesting developments there. Could you talk about the implications of all of this to the economy? You mentioned the opportunity cost, right? There's also now confronted with US tariffs, a sluggish Chinese economy where Koreans are likely increasingly having difficulty doing business or be moving out of China. So can you tell us the implications on the macroeconomic front in South Korea?
The first thing to say is that even before December last year, so even before the martial law episode, there were more and more worrying signs about the South Korean economy. We're seeing growth projections being downgraded consistently over months. I did a series of interviews last year with the finance minister, with the governor of the Bank of Korea, all saying that the growth model based on manufacturing and exports and this sort of state-directed capitalism which has really powered the Korean economy over decades, that it's really running out of steam and it's really struggling to cope with rising competition, especially cutting-edge technological competition from China. And to some extent, the events of the last few months has distracted not just policymakers from addressing these issues, but actually it's sort of muddied the picture. A lot of the slowing growth that's happening in South Korea is now being attributed simply to the political crisis, whereas although the political crisis is an important factor, it's by no means the other one. There's basically three. There's the long-term structural problems that the South Korean economy has, and that's also related to the demographic issue. The second is martial law and what's been happening in the last few months. And of course, the third, as you mentioned, is the Trump tariffs, and not just Trump tariffs potentially directly on South Korea, but just the general effect on the global trading system upon which South Korean exporting model depends so much. I interviewed the governor of the Bank of Korea, so the central bank, in the immediate aftermath of the martial law declaration. At that time, he played down the martial law declaration, saying actually the potential Trump tariffs would be a lot more damaging. But since then, the BOK has had to acknowledge that actually this prolonged political turmoil has had a bad effect. So the picture is not good, but we cannot attribute it simply to the martial law declaration. But of course, the martial law declaration and this wasted few months, in a sense, reminds us that arguably we've had a wasted few years in Korean economic policy as well.
Oh, interesting. All right, outstanding. Thank you, Christian, for that excellent intervention. Martin, over to you. Let's talk a little bit about the view from Tokyo, the region, both in terms of the politics, the regional cooperation in terms of Tokyo, Seoul, that piece, picking up on Christian's thread about the security challenges, which we didn't tease out. That would be great, number one. And then number two, a little bit about the impact on the regional economy as well. Martin, floor is yours, and welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you, Mark. Yeah, so I mean, Christian pointed out that Korea is kind of doing this at a very bad time, and that really, I think, is the sentiment in Tokyo. You know, there's with all the uncertainty about Trump and his level of commitment in Asia, and will the U.S. be a reliable partner, and all these things are kind of out in the ether now. You know, it's a terrible time for South Korea to withdraw like this. And that's the view from Japan, is that really South Korea has kind of just left the stage. One of the Japanese Prime Minister, Ishiba Shigeru, one of his responses to Trump has been to try to do a multilateral approach. Ishiba has spoken for a long time about, creating some sort of a NATO in Asia, right? There's no structure like that in Asia. Asia's always been, either it's China or it's like Washington as the hub, and you have Seoul and Tokyo and Manila as these various spokes. And Ishiba has been trying to take this sort of multilateral approach, reaching out to Australia or strengthening ties with Australia, India, Vietnam, the Philippines. I mean, Japan really has kind of been reaching out in all sorts of directions. And the one place that they really, really would love to have closer relations with, and seems like a natural fit in this environment, is South Korea. And they just feel like, there's no one there. There's no one answering the phone. The other thing is that they fear what's going to come out of the political situation in South Korea, right? They're afraid that if for example, if Lee Jae-myung wins the election, are we back to another, left-wing former human rights lawyer activist who's harping on the comfort women? And do we go back to sort of an anti-Japan policy, or even like an effort to distance South Korea from the U.S.? Japan's strategy, Ishiba's strategy during this Trump uncertainty, has been to make Japan into this sort of essential ally. How can Japan be the ally that the U.S. cannot do without? And you've seen it with it began under Kishida, but the doubling of security spending, a lot going on. When Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, was in town 2 weeks ago, he visited the Philippines, he visited Japan. He didn't go to Seoul, right? South Korea was not on the schedule. On the agenda, and that spoke a lot in Japan. That was seen as yet another sign of South Korea. Is it they're not effectively dealing with the Trump administration? They're not communicating. They're just sort of a void almost. And with the Americans, Japan has been trying very hard to do things like step up on conventional capabilities. One of the big topics between Hegseth and the Japanese Minister of Defense, Nakatani Gen, was a Japanese production of American missiles, right? That Mitsubishi Heavy and these guys would build SM-6s and Tomahawks and you name it. And again, like the kind of the other sort of natural fit there is South Korea. It has a similar kind of industrial base. It could handle the technology, and yet it's not there. And so there is this real concern, like what happens going forward. Is South Korea kind of leaving itself out of this? And it's a very disturbing thing, because if Trump does show a wavering in the commitment, right? And so far, Hegseth's message when he came to Tokyo was very reassuring. He was being very, very positive. Japan's our model ally, Hegseth said. And we're standing with you, and the Senkakus are part of the security treaty, and we're with you. But if Korea kind of drops out of this whole thing, and if there's this feeling of wavering commitment on the part of the U.S. for Korea, where does that take things, right? If Korea starts feeling anxious, what I'm hearing in Tokyo now is concern about, does Korea, they got a nuclear armed neighbor, 20 kilometers from Seoul, whatever. Do they go nuclear? I mean, it's like all sorts of things become possible, very scary scenarios. And then how does Japan react to that? And so there's this potential in South Korea not being engaged of even perhaps a destabilizing effect. So there are some real concerns there with South Korea and kind of this sort of self-induced paralysis that's happening.
All right, outstanding. Thanks, Martin. Let me go to Victor, because I think you set Victor up well. I can feel him wanting to come in on this. Victor, floor is yours. comments on obviously the Christian and Jean's interventions on the domestic situation, but the regional piece that Martin brought in as well. Fascinating stuff. Victor, over to you.
Thanks, Mark, again, and thanks to Martin, Jean, and Christian for coming on so late. So let me make.
You guys, I didn't even bother asking you a question this time because I knew you wouldn't answer it. So like I've done 110 episodes, 105, you don't answer the question. So I just thought I'd throw it to you.
Okay, I'm going to try to keep my streak going here. So let me make three quick points about where we are now in terms of South Korea domestic, and then go to the foreign policy. So the first is, I think, and these are really questions. There's a real question and debate about whether the PPP in Korea has moved too far to the right, that it has been captured by sort of the far right, in part because of the impeachment of this long protracted impeachment process and decision in which Yoon has been mobilizing supporters for this purpose, which doesn't position them well for the election. The second, and I was in a conversation, I'm in LA right now, I was in a conversation in LA last night about this, is whether the DPK has sort of moved into that space, that the PPP has moved so far to the right that there's much more space now for the DPK to operate in the middle. And that, Lee is very clearly trying to do that, trying to occupy as much of the middle, right-clicking, as they say in Korea, right? Right-clicking in Korea. Even on Japan, as Martin was talking about, and Mark, you know this well, the DPK sent lawmakers to DC in January to just let the United States, everybody they could talk to, know that the anti-Japan part of the first impeachment motion was not put there by the DPK. I don't know whether that's true or not, but they were going around telling everybody that Choguk's party were the ones who put that in, and they were like too busy about other things, and they're like, oh crap, we didn't know this was in here, sort of plausible deniability. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. Third point is, Lee is what, I don't know, Gene, what is he, like 30 points ahead right now of the next PPP candidate, but we really don't know because Lee's a very divisive figure, and there's an anti-Lee vote out there, and we won't see crystallize until the PPP has a candidate, if they have one. They may not have one. And then on the foreign policy end, I think, you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this will be the first presidential campaign in which whoever the candidates are, they're going to be asked about foreign policy issues that matter to the United States and Japan. Like, they're going to be asked about how you're going to deal with the Trump tariffs. They're going to be asked about, should South Korea go nuclear? They're going to be asked about shipbuilding, about energy. Of course, there'll be domestic issues, but I just think that the context in which this is happening, it is going to cause people to ask what are their positions on these issues. And it might be, foreign policy might be more of an issue in this campaign than we've seen in previous ones.
All right, let's pick up on that thread you laid down on your third point, Victor, and bring it to Jean. Jean, I guess to put it bluntly, do you agree with my esteemed colleague at CSIS, Dr. Cha? And what do you see in terms of the contours of the race at this point shaping up? What are the key issues likely to be, and what should those of us in Washington be watching during the early stages of this relatively short presidential election?
Well, I think it's absolutely true to say that Lee Jae-myung is very much trying to position himself in the center, and even as a conservative. I mean, he made this speech, I think it was last month, which really surprised people here, where he came out and said that the DPK was not a progressive party, it was in fact a conservative party. And these are clearly the votes that he's going for. He knows that if he is going to win this election, he's going to have to win those moderate conservative voters. He has lost an election before, of course, and he does not want to lose another one. So he is doing what he needs to do. That said, I think, well, we had him actually come out today and kind of put forward a little bit of his platform. And so it was interesting what was in there and what wasn't in there. So very much he is focusing on the economy. So I have no doubt that foreign policy will play big, as Victor said, but I think Lee Jae-myung is really going to try and win those center votes, is going to be focusing on the economy and economic growth and addressing those issues that Christian was talking about earlier. He has made clear that he wants to really focus on investment in Korean businesses, Korean manufacturing specifically. But he was saying today, but then the time is now to make sure that all of Korea benefits from our manufacturing industry. So he's very much into wealth redistribution, we know. He talks a lot about inequality in Korea. He sees inequality as being really one of the real ills of Korea that is responsible for a lot of the problems, be they the social problems in Korea or the economic problems. He has touted in the past a basic minimum wage. He may want to try and bring up the current minimum wage as it is. So I think we're going to see those economic policies play really heavily. When it comes to foreign policy, I mean, he didn't even mention North Korea today when he introduced his policy platform. And I think that is what we are going to see going forward. I think North Korea is not really going to feature in this election. But it's going to be interesting to see where the candidates position themselves when it comes to the alliance, because Lee Jae-myung has made it very clear that the alliance is his priority, that maintaining the trilateral relationship with the US and Japan is his priority. Now, yes, that is, I think, what he knows some people want to hear from him, but it does seem to be a genuine standpoint that he realizes that these are the important relationships for Korea right now, and that they want to focus on these like-minded countries. But I think we will see, there will be some discussion over what it means for policy with China and Russia. And in some ways, you might see the DPK wanting to rebuild those relationships, which I think they think at the moment are rock bottom under Yoon. And I think they blame Yoon for tarnishing those relations. But how they will actually go about building back up those relations with China and Russia, particularly when they have to work with the US, and the US might be making it very clear to South Korea what it wants South Korea's China policy to be. So I think that's going to be very tricky. I think on the PPCP side, the conservative side of things, I think it's just very difficult to know what issues are going to play for them, because we just don't have a sense yet about whether they are going to go more in a kind of that extreme conservative, right-wing side with their candidate that we've seen, and kind of Yoon side, or whether they are going to be able to gravitate more towards the center ground.
All right, outstanding, Jean. Really interesting stuff there. I mean, just a quick moderator's prerogative and comments. I am with you in terms of some feeling about sincerity on the Japan and other issues, in that there's some continuity. People forget that end of Moon Jae-in, they start moving in that direction, right? The DP did, at least to my mind. And the second is your Russia point's a very interesting one. A complicated issue, DPRK troops, the Europeans, an evolving American policy, the relationship with Ukraine, a tricky piece of business for policymakers in Seoul. Really interesting stuff there. Okay, over to Christian. Christian, your thoughts. One, we've talked a lot about the economy. More to add on Lee Jae-myung's platform, that would be of interest. But obviously, I don't want to hem you in to just the economic portfolio, because you cut a large swath. Let's put it that way. And please comments on the other interventions as well.
Sure. I mean, just one memory that's coming back to me when we're talking about Lee Jae-myung and Japan. I mean, because Yoon's term was cut short, the last presidential election is pretty fresh in our memories. And I do remember going before the last presidential election. And we should mention that Lee Jae-myung was a candidate against Yoon in the last one and lost by less than 1 percentage point margin. I remember going to a briefing at the Foreign Correspondents Club where Lee Jae-myung was speaking to the foreign press, and he was asked about his attitude to Japan and was he anti-Japanese. And he spent about 25 minutes talking about how he wasn't Japanese, which is a bit like, someone talking for 25 minutes about how they're not over their ex-girlfriend. It kind of has the opposite effect to what it's supposed to have, because when someone protests too much. And then, of course, we saw, although albeit in opposition, when, for example, there was the Fukushima water leak, he accused Japan of, I think it was nuclear terrorism or biological terrorism, the phrase that he used. So this was the non-anti-Japanese Lee Jae-myung speaking. But of course, everyone acknowledges that he's perfectly capable of adapting and changing his position. So that doesn't necessarily mean that that's the position he would take as president. But I think people should be aware that his capacity to move in one direction or another. And as some people say, he's not going to govern in isolation. He has a party, he has a base, and so even if he himself is willing to pivot and to take very different positions, especially on some of these sensitive foreign policy issues, especially relating to Japan and even China, it's not clear that his base will go with him. So he may be constrained. I think Jean. I agree with that absolutely. I mean, I think that the economy, there's the wider economic picture, particularly SMEs are suffering in South Korea. They really suffered during the pandemic, and that's still a problem there. The other big issue is corporate governance reform, and whether we talk about whether the state-directed capitalism of Korea is still delivering, but the corporate structure that underpins that, the privileges that controlling shareholders, the family owners of the big companies have, is that still consistent with a modern liberal democracy? Some people regard the democratization of the capital markets and of the ownership model of those companies as really the last pillar in the last chapter in the democratization of South Korea itself. The Korea discount, which was for a long time a sort of, something for foreign investors to remark and joke about, is really becoming a big domestic issue, partly because so many more Koreans are themselves retail investors in Korean stocks, but also because they invest in US stocks as well, and they realize that they have almost no protections as holders of Korean stocks. If you hold Korean shares and you hold US shares, you realize what protections you don't have as a Korean shareholder. And it's also very relevant to the demographic issue, because the National Pension Service, which is the biggest holder of Korean stocks, is projected to run out of money in a few decades' time. And so this is not just about people's portfolio going up and down. This is really existential in terms of the economic health of the country. And the Democratic Party has been more active on pushing for reform there. And so even something as simple as introducing a fiduciary duty to shareholders, which Korea doesn't have, which some American viewers might find interesting, if that was introduced, that could actually precipitate really, really deep-seated reform in the entire economic model, if it means breaking the hold of the families over the big companies in Korea. So I think that's really relevant. Jean was absolutely right to note about North Korea. I mean, what's interesting is, other than whether the nuclear threat from North Korea may mean that South Korea has to go nuclear, I mean, North Korea seems almost completely absent from any of these discussions. I think it's also important to note that Lee Jae-myung seems much, much less ideological when it comes to North Korea than, for example, Moon Jae-in was. I think it's much less emotional issue for Lee Jae-myung than for Moon Jae-in. And the other big difference that's happened on that front is that, of course, North Korea has repudiated the idea of unification whatsoever, which actually creates a very new dynamic in all of these things. So that's, even in the last 3 years, that's a major change. And the final thing I would say, just in terms of, and I'm sure we'll go on to this about US-ROC alliance and so on, and of course, there are legitimate questions about South Korea's reliability as a partner, stability as a partner, as a foreign policy partner. But frankly, the far, far bigger question is actually, is the United States a reliable foreign policy partner? Not, is South Korea a reliable partner? And South Korea has about 2 months to resolve its leadership issue, and the United States has 4 years. So actually, this issue in South Korea and that effect on the Indo-Pacific alliance, and what how that will play out. South Korea is not, I would say, the top of the agenda when we're talking about challenges facing the Democratic Alliance in East Asia.
All right, fantastic, Christian. I would just underscore your points too about the different environment in which we find ourselves in 3 short years, right? And that has implications for the relationship with Japan, right? Popular opinion is swirling around that. North Korea, obviously, as you mentioned, and the United States, completely different. And basically 80 days in terms of the outlook and disposition and on many issues. Let me just come back one quick follow-up then to Martin, because I know we're running out of time. You make the point about Lee Jae-myung's base not being there with respect to Japan. What about on some of the economic policy proposals that, as you point out, require some real diligence because of some, you would say, structural issues with the economy? That'll take some doing and potentially some politically difficult measures, or could. How does the politics of economics and economic policymaking look under Lee Jae-myung?
I'll just use one example of one debate, which I think is quite instructive, which is, very influential people, not just leading officials, but for example, Chae Tae-won, the chairman of SK Group, which is the second biggest company in South Korea. He's also the chairman of the Korean Chamber of Commerce and Industry. So in many ways, he's a spokesperson for Korean industry, has talked about having to move away from an export-driven model. This is one of the things that Japan has successfully executed, which Korea hasn't, which is to make large-scale foreign direct investments so that your investments you can repatriate profits from abroad. But at the moment, Korea either exports or it makes greenfield investments abroad, where it takes all of the responsibility. This is what we're seeing in the United States at the moment. And of course, with the tariffs in the US, there's potentially going to be more and more of a pull factor in terms of Korean investment being made outside of Korea, being made in the United States instead. I mean, just look at Hyundai, for example. They've just announced this $20 billion investment. Samsung is investing $40 billion in its semiconductor facilities in Texas. Whether or not these investments are wise, that's a totally separate issue, but that is seen by many, especially on the Korean left, as investments that could have been made in Korea, but are being made abroad instead. And of course, it brings up the question of, even if Korean companies can thrive abroad, what does that mean for Korean employment? What does that mean for the Korean labor unions? And if we're moving away from an exporting model or even a manufacturing model, what does that mean for existing employment structure in Korea? And the labor unions in Korea are very powerful. And, is a left-wing president going to be able to modernize the Korean economy, for example, through greater automation, introduction of smart factories and so on, which don't employ very many people? Will his economic agenda and his labor agenda be able to reconcile themselves in a way which Korea needs to do? And I'm not advocating actually one policy or another, but you can see the tensions there. Right.
You nailed it. You got exactly to where I wanted you to with these. All Min Jae-dong presidents have, obviously labor is a core constituency. It's a very interesting tension. We saw it in the United States, actually, under President Biden in terms of his policies as well. Okay, Martin, we're getting to the end here. I just wanted to throw it open to you. Comments, view from Tokyo, view on the region, maybe a little bit about US-ROK alliance, all in 90 seconds. Easy 90 questions.
Seconds. Okay, I just wanted to say one thing in response to Victor. I was speaking with somebody at the Japanese Ministry of Foreign Affairs today, and Lee's team, right, Lee Jae-myung's team, has been trying to reassure the Japanese that Lee will not blow up the relationship. The perception in Tokyo is that things have gone in a good direction under Yoon, and there is at least messaging that's not only in public but also through direct channels that Lee will keep that. Whether you believe it or not, I don't know, but that's the messaging. Other thing is, Christian was talking about kind of how the tariffs and investment. Japan's big card when it comes to Trump in the U.S. is its investments, right? It's now the largest foreign investor in the United States. It surpassed the United Kingdom. And that's what they're going to be taking to Washington when Nakazawa, the trade envoy, goes to talk to Besant and these folks. It's going to be investment, and they're going to have to promise tens of billions of dollars. My guess is it's going to be energy, but we'll see what happens. But that's going to be what they're going to put on the table, and it really is that investment that I think Japan is sort of their trump card. Forgive the pun.
All right, outstanding, Martin. Really appreciate that. And maybe just one go back from me in terms of the Japanese concern about Seoul and a progressive government. It's also fair to say that the U.S. has a role here to play, right? In terms of under Trump 1, this relationship, the trilateral relationship, was not as important as it was, right? And to their credit, I think this time around, there's been more emphasis on it, right? You've seen Rubio active, you've seen Waltz active. So the U.S. has I think, a stake in this. I don't want to overstate the U.S.'s role, but if you create a vacuum, then certain things happen. If you are aggressive and in the mix, I think that leads to a different set of potential outcomes. Martin, just your thoughts on that quickly, then Victor to wrap.
Yeah, no, I think under President Biden, of course, the trilateral was definitely a front burner issue, and Trump they've sent mixed signals. I mean, at least the view from Tokyo. I can't speak from Seoul, but from Tokyo, Hegseth came and he said all the right things. Frankly, Ministry of Defense here in Japan, at a briefing after it, the Hegseth visit, was very happy with what he came to offer. And so you've had a lot of betrayal and anger on the tariffs, but you've also had, Trump has been very reassuring on the security. Whether that's true or not and what happens in the future, I don't know. But that's the messaging now has been, as you say, it's not all negative. It's been kind of a mixed bag.
Interesting. Okay, betrayal and anger. That's what I get when I don't walk Grigsby, my basset hound. He gets very angry and feels betrayed. All right, excellent. All right, Victor, final word to you.
I guess I'll just say two things. I mean, one is, I think it's interesting how the acting government really has sort of taken some actions now that the impeachment is behind them. We saw this phone call with Trump, which I never would have expected, right? Directly addressing the tariffs issue. And maybe that is something that there is, in a sense, bipartisan support for, because I'm sure that whoever the candidates are, they would love to have this issue of tariffs addressed before they come into office, one would imagine. And then the other was this decision to open relations with Syria, which was kind of another sort of surprising move. But it shows like the acting government is taking some steps now, which is good. Given all that we've said, and like Christian said, we've been in stasis for 4 months now, and people expect it for another 2. The other thing on Japan, I'll just say, is that, I think part of this effort by Lee Jae-myung to right-click, to tack to the center on Japan, I think part of that is about, selling this image that he is more to the right or even conservative, although I think many people who know him say he has no ideology. He can do all sorts of things depending on the political winds. But I think it's also a function or directly related to the point that I think you made, Mark, about U.S. concerns about U.S. Not being reliable, U.S. being unpredictable and reliable, right? At a time when there is, the external environment is not looking very good. And so, that may be another reason why there actually may be, a strategic rationale for even a DPK leader to say, like, we've got to cool it with Japan and sort of move forward with some of this trilateral efforts.
All right, outstanding. Great way to end. Thank you, Victor. Thanks to our special guest, Jean Mackenzie, BBC, thank you. Tour de force,
Thank you.
Christian Davies, thank you. Outstanding. Martin Fackler, subpar, but we'll accept it this time. Just kidding, of course. You were outstanding, as always. Really appreciate it. And again, thanks really to our guests for staying up late. We know it was a long week. We really appreciate it. And I know our viewers benefited tremendously from your insights, analysis, and good counsel. Thanks again. And we'll have to have you back. Last word, Doosan, 7 and 10. I got my 2016 champions mugs in hopes of rekindling the Bears' rise up the table for the next couple of months in the KBO season. All right, with that, gavel down. See everybody in 2 weeks. Bye-bye. Thanks again.
Bye.